Welcome to class. This is Intro to Political Ideas. I'm Ken Hicks, and we've been talking this past 2 weeks about liberation ideologies and the politics of identity. We're going to continue our discussion, talk a little bit more about gay liberation. Then we're going to move on to the subject of indigenous liberation. There are a variety of indigenous peoples around the world that share common beliefs about their circumstances. Then we'll talk a little bit about liberation theology, which is a predominantly Christian view that has both Catholic and Protestant adherents that make the argument that we have obligations to one another that transcend spiritual concerns. And then we'll conclude by, again, kind of wrapping up and discussing how these different identity politics ideologies kind of blend together. So once again, I want to be sure that the audience is aware that nothing in the presentation of this material is intended to create stereotypes, stigmatize certain races, place blame on one race for racism against another, assign moral burdens to one race, and or divide individuals or groups by race. Remember, the point behind looking at these different ideologies is so that we can understand the perspectives that are being involved. I am not intending to cast aspersions on anyone in the audience. It's my hope that having a better understanding of these different perspectives helps you understand both the strengths and the weaknesses of these kinds of ideological positions. So let's jump back into gay liberation, the backlash that has occurred against gains made within the LGBTQ plus community. For many gay liberation activists, a great deal remains to be done. If you look at the picture on the slide, this is the Greenwich Liberation statues that were commissioned in 1992 as part of the Stonewall National Monument. So again, in a very short period of time, and we talked about this in our last presentation, people's attitudes, not just in terms of consciousness raising within these various communities, but the broader attitude of people generally has become significantly more tolerant than it was a generation ago. People of my generation, in particular, the baby boomer generation and the generation immediately after it, or before the silent generation, if you will, or the greatest generation, were generally very uncomfortable with people that made different choices as it relates to sexual orientation. But that has changed. A lot of members of the upcoming generation are far more tolerant of these kinds of things. In part, again, because they know someone that has a different sexual or identity orientation. So right now, less than half of states have laws that ban discrimination against gay people in employment. That basically means 27 states don't have those kinds of laws. And the implication is that if you're a gay teacher, you could be fired without cause, simply because your employer discovers that you're gay. Gay tenants could be evicted simply because the landlord discovers your sexual orientation. Same-sex couples can be denied the right to adopt or even foster children in those 27 states. And there have been additional kind of legal backlashes. Indiana is one of the first states that passed what was known as the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, the effect of which is basically to allow business owners to refuse service to anyone to whom the employer disapproves on religious grounds. And again, the argument would be this is a First Amendment right, that people who have businesses who happen to embrace a particular religion have a right to refuse service to anyone whose lifestyle choices they happen to disagree with. The Supreme Court has kind of reinforced that argument with the Supreme Court's decision in Masterpiece Cake Shop versus Colorado Civil Rights Commission. In that case, the store owner, the guy that owned Masterpiece Cake Shop, Jack Phillips, a gay couple visited his shop. They asked if he would design a cake for them. He basically said, "I don't do that because your decision to marry is offensive to my religious beliefs. However, you're welcome to buy any other products in the store." The couple reported him to Colorado's anti-civil rights commission, and and Colorado enforced a law on the books, the Anti-Discrimination Acts, which basically make public accommodations requirements. And the basic argument is that if you are doing something for money, you have a commercial responsibility to engage, to behave in a non-discriminatory manner. The Supreme Court held in a 6-3 majority that the state's Civil Rights Commission displayed hostility to Phillips' religious views. That is the current status of the law. I would point out that, based on that argument, that Southern owners of barbecue restaurants could have claimed that they had a religious belief that black people were inferior to them, and that therefore they didn't have to provide them with service, which would be in a direct violation of the Civil Rights Act. But this is the Supreme Court, and they have made their decision. There are a number of unintended consequences that flow from that perspective. Under the current Supreme Court jurisprudence, the Masterpiece Cake Shop, or the the Masterpiece Cake Shop, a Muslim store owner could refuse service to a woman wearing whatever they consider to be immodest clothing. If she was wearing shorts or a skirt, anything that displayed their legs. If they refused to wear an abaya or a burqa, which is a facial covering. The burqa is the more heavy-duty, hardcore version where everything, your entire head is basically covered. And they could say, well, I'm a Muslim and it's my First Amendment right to freedom of religious belief, and I believe that women walking around in scantily clad, that is a violation of my religious rights. Likewise, a neo-Nazi could claim membership in the World Church of the Creator, which espouses white supremacy, and they could argue that it's therefore their right to refuse to serve Jews based on their sincerely held religious beliefs. Right now, to this point, 36 states have passed what they call RFRL legislation, religious restoration freedom rights. And so again, that's where we stand. And this points to something important both in politics and in how political ideologies work, and that is whenever a group succeeds in doing something, there is almost inevitably going to be a backlash from groups of people who feel as though that group's success comes at a cost to them. It creates this kind of zero-sum atmosphere. Okay, and this is we're certainly living through that really from 2017. To the present, certainly more than 9 years now. A lot of our politics has been characterized by this kind of backlash, whiplash politics, which again, frankly, is hard to square with many of our constitutional obligations and many of our legal obligations as it relates to civil liberties. The war against transgender Americans has continued. It really erupted. It began again in around 2018. North Carolina passed an ordinance requiring everyone using public restrooms to attend the restroom on their birth certificate of their biological birth. You have the politics of President Donald Trump's executive order banning transgender military service, and then you also have the controversies surrounding the first trans member of Congress, following the election of Sarah McBride, who's pictured on this slide, to the House of Representatives from the state of Delaware. South Carolina Republican Sandra Mace introduced a bill to ban transgender women from using the Capitol Hill women's bathroom. Republican Speaker Mike Johnson enacted the ban, kind of used his power as Speaker, and McBride basically said she would comply with the order, saying, "I'm not here to fight about bathrooms. I'm here to fight for Delawareans and bring down costs facing families." And she faced a lot of backlash from within the transgender community and other members of the LGBTQ plus community, basically saying, that we have to fight these battles whenever they occur. McBride's argument is we shouldn't be swinging at pitches in the dirt. That's a baseball metaphor, basically saying, do you always want to fight on grounds of your opponent's choosing? That's not really a prudent way to pursue equality. The more you come across as intolerant of other people's intolerance, the more you are simply lowering the level of our public discourse. Unsurprisingly, there have been a spate of crackdowns in authoritarian countries. The Russian parliament basically passed an anti-gay law that made it basically illegal for you to even be attracted to another male. Imagine how ripe that sort of law would be for abuse. Where you could just allege that a person stared at another person of the same sex, and that would justify you being arrested by police. There's a Russian all-female band whose name I will not utter on television because their name is probably rhymed. It's related to kitty cats. And their whole kind of rise in prominence is related to the rise of Russian homophobia in that country. And again, this is one of the ways that Vladimir Putin has kind of invoked Putinism as a way of reinforcing his control over society. This is a way where an intolerant majority can be mobilized in the service of authoritarian ends. You have long-standing and very draconian anti-gay laws in Africa and the Middle East. In many countries of the Middle East and Africa, you can be put to death for being gay and being caught doing something that is related to being a member of the LGBTQ plus community. And so again, even in some African countries, even being attracted to the same sex is a crime. And so for many people, when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, she made the argument, gay rights are human rights, which is simply not the case in those countries where majorities are intolerant and want and where majorities don't want people's eccentric sexual orientations to be made public. And this is what a lot of people in the United States, a lot of religious conservatives are working hard to recreate that kind of, to cultivate intolerance among Americans. They would put it in a different way. They would basically say that they are trying to return to traditional values. But their argument is they want to return to the values that justify discrimination and in fact, punishment of those people whose sexual decisions they don't happen to agree with. And so it's a perennial democratic problem. Should majorities be able to decide any and every issue? I've made the point in this class a couple of times. Democracy is really only as good as the people practicing it. And there are many instances where majorities of people decide that the activities of a minority of people are somehow objectionable to them, and that creates a rationale for the majority to punish those people. And so there are questions, are there some issues that should be shielded from the democratic process? I mentioned the California bill, Proposition 8 from the early 2000s, where surprisingly for a lot of people, the state of California voted, a majority of the people supported a proposition to ban same-sex marriage. And it shouldn't be all that surprising to people, because a lot of members of the Democratic coalition, including many Hispanic members and many black members, do still have pretty strong senses of discomfort about same-sex, homosexuality, or whatever you want to call it. And so that was one of the things that the drafters of Proposition 8 were able to capitalize on. And again, so that kind of raises the issue. Again, if democracy means that communities place themselves in a position to punish minorities for things that really don't affect the majority of people, it creates a real problem. And again, currently in Nigeria, 98% of the population favors strict laws against same-sex relationships. So again, I pointed out, democracy is only as good as the people practicing it. And a lot of conservatives would say that's absolutely correct. That in fact, when people are discriminating against minorities because they are doing things that religious conservatives consider to be perverted, that in fact that is democracy defending itself against perversion, and that would be one way of looking at it. So let's move on and talk a little bit about another, again, part of these identity movements and the challenge for them is just how far flung the communities are. We've been talking about gay liberation, and the fact that, the reality is, to be a male, to be gay versus being a lesbian is a very different experience, and they don't necessarily naturally align with one another. And being gay and lesbian doesn't innately cause you to want to ally with people that are transgender or bisexual or queer. These are distinctive kind of modes of identity that make it sometimes quite difficult for members of these communities to band together. But they all recognize that they are stronger together. And so there are also strong incentives for those folks to try and act in concert where they can. The challenge for indigenism, or Native peoples' liberation, is not only that they're coming from different places, they are geographically far-flung, but they all have similar experiences with what we might describe as settler colonialism, where they have been displaced from ancestral lands. And so if you look, there are large numbers of Native American tribes. There are large numbers of Native Americans in Central and South America. There are large numbers of tribal identities in Africa, and for that matter also in Asia as well. And so there tend to be striking similarities. First, they live on lands on which their ancestors were the first inhabitants. That is the meaning of indigenous. Second, the ancestral lands were subsequently taken from them and occupied predominantly by Europeans. Third, these natives and their languages and traditions were denounced as barbaric, and they were forced to accept alien beliefs and practices. Fourth, with their lands taken from them, Native peoples were deprived of pride, dignity, and political power. And finally, fifth, the destruction of culture and identity came with other problems, or brought with them other problems: poverty, unemployment, alcoholism, crime, drug addiction, and high rates of suicide. And again, when you think about what happens to people when they are subjected to systemic oppression, those are the problems that tend to come. In many instances, Native Americans were forced onto reservation land that was deemed by whites to be not worthy of fighting over. And when things were discovered, like they discovered, I can't remember if it's gold or silver in the Black Hills, whites began invading, the Black Hill area in South or North Dakota. I can't remember which of the Dakotas it's in. And, there was a subsequent, war fought where, that the Indians, the Native Americans of those regions were, again, massacred because of land that was given to them by treaty that was subsequently, abrogated. Settler colonialism is a distinctive form of colonization, while some Europeans, notably the Spanish, and to some extent the Portuguese, engaged in what we might describe as exploitation colonization, where they would basically enslave local populations and then use slave labor to extract whatever it was that they wanted. With the Spanish, it was largely gold and silver in the New World. Settler colonialism sought to establish permanent settlements, which necessarily involved the displacement of indigenous populations. This is often justified in millenarian or religious terms. The American idea of manifest destiny, for example, is a really good example of how settler colonialism operated. It's also important to keep in mind with the British, for example. Settler colonialism really evolved from England's difficulties in managing their religious pluralism, their sort of rapid shift to religious pluralism. Remember, England was a Catholic country until Henry VIII. Henry VIII was the protector of Catholicism. That was one of his titles. He had fought numerous wars in support of Catholicism. And so when he shifted and took over control of the Anglican Church, first and foremost, it antagonized many English Catholics. But then you also had a proliferation of different religious sects that emerged within the confines of the United Kingdoms. And so not only did they have to deal with dissident Catholics, they had lots and lots of very restive Protestant sects, like the Puritans, for example, that were, the whole idea of, the name Puritan reflects something important about their vision of politics, which was that any hint of political corruption they would vehemently denounce. And of course, for them, any exertion of power often called into question, the corruption. And so, England was using colonization as a pressure valve to, kind of move these divisive religious sects out of England proper. Obviously, the New England colonies, the first people that came in there were the Puritans. But you also had successive waves of other Protestants that moved out when they kind of got to the point where they didn't feel like they were comfortable in England. Many Catholics moved to a charter colony called Maryland, which was, again, it was chartered by the Crown to provide a place for unhappy Catholics to go and live outside of the direct rule of the kings of England. And so indigenism, again, reflects a particular political idea. They are seeking to promote and defend the interests of native or indigenous people. There is a claim to a fundamental overarching unity or a common civilization that binds indigenous people together. That Native Americans in North America, in both the United States and Canada, and Aborigines in Australia, and the Kikwi tribes in Nigeria, and tribal groups in Latin America, they all share that common sense of a civilization of which they have been deprived. Okay, and so many of the commonalities arise out of the shared experiences of colonialism. And one of the accusations that is often leveled by indigenous peoples are that colonialism amounted to a kind of cultural genocide. The economic rationale for colonialism, again, was that there was a great deal of raw material out there. The Industrial Revolution unleashed the productive forces of European and American societies. White immigration and Europeans' technological advantages, particularly in military affairs, facilitated the military defeat of native peoples, and the comprehensive nature of European dominance. For example, England was the largest empire in the world, and the motto of the English Empire was "Make the world England." And so they were intent on kind of forcing their religious practices, their social practices, their governing practices, their way of building. The French did very similar things where, you can tell the difference between an African country that was dominated by the French versus the English by the way those buildings that were built in that period are constructed and the way they look. And along with that comes the destruction of indigenous culture and also indigenous families, much like was from our discussion of black liberation. In many instances, enslavement meant the breaking up of families because, again, you are reducing people to mere chattel, to mere property. A particularly poignant example of that was the stolen generation in Australia around late 19th into the 1970s, or really early 20th century. White Australians became convinced that Aborigines were a doomed race. And so from 1910 to the 1970s, nearly 100,000, a significant proportion of Aboriginal children were forcibly taken from their families, and they were treated in the most horrific ways. The ones that looked white were given by adoption to white Australian families. The ones that were not were forced into orphanages and treated horrifically. In 1997, Australian Prime Minister John Howard issued a personal apology. He was not speaking on behalf of the country. And most Aborigines viewed that as a relatively hollow kind of apology. Finally, in 2008, Prime Minister Kevin Rudd issued a formal apology on behalf of the government of Australia. And so that had somewhat more of an ameliorative effect, although again, that also came over time with some legal decisions and legislative decisions that greatly improved the status of Aborigines within Australian society. The same sorts of culture-crushing policies took place in the United States as well as in Canada. The old saying in the United States was "kill the Indian and save the soul." Canada and the United States had highly paternalistic treatments of their indigenous populations. You had the establishment of hundreds of Indian boarding schools, of which the Carlisle Industrial School was simply the most prominent. They were literally, again, taking children from their homes and forcing them into these schools, forcing them to learn European and American ways of doing things. The consequences of those policies, again, were terrible. You had the loss of language, the loss of culture and history. Again, the disruption of Native American families, and additionally, there were widespread reports of sexual and physical abuse. And the mass graves kind of put a bow on it. Canada in 1998 issued a formal apology for their treatment of Native Americans. They also created Nunavut, which is a native language, Our Land, which was designated out of one of their more kind of sparsely populated areas in the north central region of above the Arctic Circle, I want to say, where they are governed by Native peoples. You have the reservation effect in the United States. Currently, indigenous Americans constitute 2% of the population. If you look at the map again, you see those lands that are considered to be reservation land. There are very large reservations. In fact, a good portion of Oklahoma is effectively reservation land. Many Americans, many Native Americans live on reservation lands or remote areas. The problem in many parts of those of indigenous, governed, America, United States, is that they again are very rural. They lack adequate housing. They lack running water, electricity. Many lack indoor plumbing. And this is kind of, again, an expression of Native American powerlessness. Native Americans didn't receive voting rights until 1924. Likewise, again, that even their votes were often suppressed in many states because they consistently voted in ways that were contrary to the dominant partisan viewpoints. And finally, of course, in 1965, you have the Voting Rights Act, which strengthened Native American voting rights. Nevertheless, Native Americans oftentimes confront really serious challenges in being able to cast a vote. Because remember, states determine the time and the place of elections, and very oftentimes states that don't want Native Americans voting will hold polling stations far removed from where Native American reservations are. In many instances, they would have to travel 40 or even 50, 60, 100 miles to get to their designated polling stations. And so that really presents enormous challenges. Voter registration is a lot more difficult on reservation lands for a variety of reasons. The Bureau of Indian Affairs has a very checkered history. Historically, the Bureau of Indian Affairs was at best. The mission is to protect Native Americans' well-being. The reality of the BIA for many generations was that they were at best engaging in benign neglect at the local level. At worst, they were facilitating the abuse of Native Americans. And of course, if you look at the history of the Osage murders, you get the sense in which the BIA was simply not interested in seriously investigating those murders. And if you've ever read Killers of the Flower Moon by James, his last name is Gran, it reflects first and foremost that the scale of those murders was far greater than people are commonly aware. That yes, there were murders, and the newly kind of formed FBI was able to get one of the worst perpetrators prosecuted. But there were lots and lots of other murders that took place where people were killing Osage for access to what was known as their head rights, their access to land that could be sold to oil companies for drilling, because they were sitting on top of an enormous reservoir of oil. And so, the BIA also participated in the assimilation policies, of the federal government between 1890 and 1930. And again, that's where all these Native American schools took place. And it's important to keep in mind that America's attitudes towards Native Americans has gone through some serious evolutions. Initially, in the nation-building portion of the United States, from ratification of the Constitution well into the 19th century, the attitude was that the only good Indian is a dead Indian, and well into the 19th century, that was the viewpoint. In the late 19th century and early 20th century, they began the idea that we can save the Indians from themselves. The Roosevelt administration in the 1930s kind of backed away from those policies and enacted policies of respecting Native Americans' traditions. The Eisenhower administration, and I would say many good things happened during the Eisenhower administrations, but if you were a Native American, that was not one of those things. The Eisenhower administration reinforced the assimilationist policy. They reinstituted them very aggressively over those 8 years. From the 60s forward, the argument of the federal government, or at least the viewpoint of the federal government, has historically been one of, again, multicultural tolerance of Native Americans' differences. And that's one of the reasons, for example, why here at Rogers State University, one of the languages that you can learn is Cherokee, because the state of Oklahoma and the United States, the federal government, believes that Cherokee should be able to speak Cherokee. So one of the more recent BIA directors, Kevin Gover, declared that the BIA participated in the ethnic cleansing that befell the Western tribes and contributed to the decimation of the mighty bison herds, the use of poison alcohol to destroy mind and body, and the cowardly killing of women and children. And he concluded, "Never again will we attack your religions, your languages, your rituals, or any of your tribal ways. Never again will we seize your children, nor teach them to be ashamed of who they are. Never again." For many Native Americans, these kind of moves towards tolerance and acceptance is too little too late. Many Native Americans remain deeply mistrustful of the federal government. Militant groups like the American Indian Movement, AIM, fight to restore the identity, power, and dignity that has been stripped from them. The cultural strategy involves, again, working more aggressively within tribal governments, drumming ceremonies, medicine lodges, and education programs for Native American children, again, designed to reverse the stigma attached to being Native American. They also want to challenge demeaning stereotypes. That's actually a picture of depiction of Native Americans from the animated cartoon by Disney of Peter Pan. There is this tendency to resort to crude characterizations of Native Americans in American movies, especially in, from the birth of the American cinema to well into the 1960s. The tendency was to view Native Americans as bloodthirsty savages. Over time, there were occasionally depictions of Native Americans, often played by white men, as somehow noble. In any event, the argument of many indigenous liberation advocates is that those portrayals were crude and were caricatures. Native Americans have also protested sports teams' use of Native American names and symbols. From its founding, the Washington franchise in the NFL was the Washington Redskins. Redskin is a pejorative name for Native Americans. Nevertheless, the people of D.C. Fought hard to retain that name. Very recently, the name was changed to the Commanders. Likewise, the Cleveland Indians. There was a lot of complaint about the argument being, again, that Indians, you were appropriating the name in an inappropriate way. I remember when the Atlanta Braves, I'm from Georgia, and I got to go to a couple of World Series games the first time they made it to the World Series in the 90s when they were playing the Minnesota Twins. And there were a number of Native American groups outside the stadium that were protesting. And I asked what they were protesting about, and they said, well, we object to the name, the Atlanta Braves. The Braves have retained their name. And I guess for many people the argument is that there really is nothing derogatory implied by the name Braves. Nevertheless, it continues to be something that some Native American groups are objecting to. I could say also, when I went to undergraduate, I went to a school called West Georgia College, which is now State University of West Georgia. Their names were the Braves. They have subsequently changed their name as well. Native Americans have also begun reading carefully their treaties and begun asserting their treaty rights. The Ojibwa tribe in Minnesota and Wisconsin have reasserted their right to traditional hunting and fishing in Wisconsin and Minnesota, which has angered many sportsmen in those areas. Though if you don't know much about Wisconsin and Minnesota, Minnesota is known as the land of 10,000 lakes. Wisconsin has almost as many lakes as well. I mean, it is really pocked with really a lot of beautiful headwaters and lakes. And the Native American tribes of those areas have said we're going to return to our traditional ways of doing things. Angry sportsmen have sued, but courts have again read the treaties and basically said until and unless the treaty is renegotiated, the treaty stands. Of course, you also have here in Oklahoma the significance of the McGirt versus Oklahoma decision. I can't remember what I think it was Buddy McGirt. He's an enrolled member of the Cherokee, I believe, was accused of a crime, was tried in Oklahoma courts. He appealed his conviction, basically saying that as a tribal member, he should not be tried in state courts. And if you're not aware of American jurisprudence and how it treats Native Americans, under American law, Native Americans are viewed as domestic dependent nations, which means they are distinct from the states wherein they reside. They are in effect federal citizens, and so the significance of the ruling in McGirt that a conservative Associate Justice Neil Gorsuch wrote the opinion for was that much of eastern Oklahoma, much of eastern and central Oklahoma is in fact reservation land. And people who are enrolled members of those tribes cannot be tried in state courts. They have to either be tried in tribal courts or they have to be tried in federal courts. And that is something that everybody is kind of scrambling to deal with. This is, going into almost 6 years now. And one thing the tribes have figured out is that they have to dramatically up their professionalization of their tribal courts. They need a lot more lawyers. They need a lot more judges to do these things adequately. And so that is one of the things that is kind of happening. Native Americans who commit crimes on tribal lands, again, have to be tried in American or in Native American or federal courts. So there's an important contrast between, indigenism and liberalism. Liberalism, again, if we recall, tends to focus on individual rights and equality before the law. Indigenism reflects a more communitarian approach. From the Native Americans' perspective or from an indigenous person's perspective, that individual's rights and dignity is innately tied to the respect and dignity conferred upon Native Americans more broadly. And so they're much more concerned about, again, their land, and they are concerned about their tribe. And so that reflects sort of a sense in which liberalism doesn't necessarily comfortably accommodate the concerns that Native Americans have in how they're treated before the law. There's actually a Canadian liberal political theorist by the name of Will Kymlicka who has written quite a bit on the challenges confronting a liberal legal order in accommodating these kinds of communitarian concerns. So when we look at Native Americans' view of freedom, the agent, again, is a specific group of people, Native peoples. The obstacle are oppressive laws and demeaning stereotypes. The goal is the recovery of pride, dignity, and self-determination. They want to be as autonomous as possible. And so again, the question is, who is sovereign in these kind of instances over what was previously tribal land? Settler colonialism often resorted to a kind of ancient jurisprudence of declaring that there weren't enough, they didn't really own the land because they hadn't improved the land. Therefore, the land was defined as legally empty, terra nullius. And so their argument is the failure of indigenous peoples to build permanent establishments. And it's important to keep in mind, for example, the Plains Indians actually tended to follow, the the buffalo herds. And other groups of Native Americans tended to move around because they didn't necessarily do the kind of agriculture that was common with European Americans. And so there's this history of repeated broken treaties whenever legally acknowledged tribal lands proved to be valuable. And recently there have been some successful challenges to the doctrine of terra nullius. In Australia, the case of Mabo versus Queensland in 1995 held that the doctrine of terra nullius was invalid, and Aboriginal peoples were ruled by the court as having established native title to the land under common law. You also, again, have the McGirt versus Oklahoma case that similarly held that until the treaty is somehow nullified or renegotiated, the tribal members have due process rights that preclude them from being tried in state courts. There are hopeful signs for Native Americans. There are signs of increased political influence. You had the election of 2 Native American women to the House of Representatives in 2018. The 2018 midterm elections that swept Democrats into control of the House also brought Sharice Davids of Kansas' 3rd District and Deb Haaland of New Mexico's 1st District, who were among those newly elected Democrats. Haaland would later become Joe Biden's first Secretary of the Interior in 2021, the first Native American to serve in a cabinet position. Haaland also recently announced her intention to run for governor of New Mexico. By the midterm elections of 2022, there were 5 Native Americans who had been elected to positions, and among those were 2 Oklahomans. Of course, Tom Cole has served for quite a while in the 4th District of Oklahoma, and Markwayne Mullen served in the 2nd District. Mullen, I believe, is an enrolled member of the Cherokee. So 2022 marked kind of a high water mark for Native American influence in Congress. Subsequently, that has kind of washed back a little bit. Mullen has been elected to the Senate. Cole is still there. There were 2 other members, Mary Peltola of Alaska. She was subsequently defeated in the last elections. So again, as I mentioned, with every success, you also have backlash. And in the United States and elsewhere, you have the rise of democratically elected conservative or even authoritarian populists that has threatened previous gains of indigenous people. The Trump administration restarted the Keystone Pipeline, which runs directly across a couple of different native lands. You also have, again, the Trump administration reduced the funding for the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the Native Health Service. And these are, again, very important resources for rural, low-income Native Americans. Trump has generally adopted a scornful attitude towards on indigenous issues. Perhaps most illustrated by his derogatory nickname of Pocahontas to Massachusetts Senator who is an Oklahoman. Her name is escaping me at the moment, but she is a native Oklahoman who has at various times claimed that she has some Native American ancestry. She never claimed herself to be an enrolled member of any tribe, and that has also led to kind of tensions between that senator and several Native American tribes. Likewise, Donald Trump has cut dramatically various domestic spending programs that again has threatened many rural Native American communities. In the Philippines, President Rodrigo Duterte declared martial law and divested indigenous peoples of their ancestral lands. He declared indigenous peoples as terrorists. He violated the law. And he used the military to drive off indigenous peoples so that economic interests, agribusiness interests could engage in logging, mining, and other extractive industries. Similarly, in Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro, again a conservative ally of Donald Trump, gave out a tremendous amount of extraordinarily harsh anti-indigenous rhetoric. He lamented that they hadn't been wiped out in the 19th century. He said that they were dirty and unclean. He launched a campaign to eliminate indigenous land reserves and to give the land again to big business, to agribusiness. And he used private armies, private security firms to intimidate or kill any indigenous peoples who resisted the seizure of reservation lands. So again, this reflects a challenge that indigenous people confront, and it's a challenge that draws them into alliance with other groups. And we might make the argument, well, why do we need indigenous rights? Well, it's for the same reason. We have civil liberties, which in a liberal society, civil liberties mean there are constraints that government is compelled to avoid infringing on people's rights. But civil rights presume, first and foremost, that not everyone's civil liberties have always been respected. This country was not an especially liberal country in 1787, and we have historically, damaged and discriminated against, peoples that were not judged to be worthy of citizenship. So let's move on and talk a little bit about liberation theology. And again, as the label suggests, this is an interpretation of religious doctrine that is basically making the case that Christians have an obligation to combat oppression and to combat poverty wherever they see it. This is a movement that emerged in the 1960s. Probably you could say it's a consequences of the Vatican II reforms. There are really two variants. The first one being largely a Catholic movement that originated in Latin America. Pictured on this slide is Gustavo Gutierrez, who was a Peruvian Catholic Dominican priest, philosopher, and theologian. He wrote a book called A Theology of Liberation that was published in 1971 that is really sort of a foundational bedrock of liberation theology. And Gutierrez is a highly revered figure within liberation theology. And so the argument for, again, liberation theology is that Christian responsibility goes beyond merely the care of people's souls. Okay, the care of the poor on this plane of existence is considered to be very important as well. And again, that is an argument that religion has more than merely spiritual responsibilities. And liberation theology represents, for many, an attempt to synthesize or blend the teachings of Jesus and the teachings of Karl Marx. They're basically saying, Jesus' Sermon on the Mount reflects an argument about the poor. Likewise, Karl Marx is making the argument that that the proletariat deserves to be given equal dignity and respect. Critics have often expressed concern that liberation theology has too much Marx and not enough Jesus. If you look at the slide, this is Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, who is a German Catholic who became Pope Benedict XIV. In 1984, Cardinal Ratzinger, who was a very powerful member within the kind of policy-making body of the papacy, wrote an instruction on certain aspects of the theology of liberation, cautioning against prioritizing political liberation over spiritual salvation. And so while not rejecting a role for the church in advocating for social justice, Ratzinger was effectively warning against allowing praxis, the idea of social justice or social action, to inform doctrine rather than vice versa. And so a key kind of concept within the framework of liberation theology is the idea of orthopraxis. And this kind of contrasts with the idea of orthodoxy, and that is the idea of correct belief. If you know much about the origins of the Catholic Church, it emerged, for a time it was, Christianity, broadly speaking, was a persecuted sect within the Roman Empire. Over time, it became the established church of the Roman Empire. And that came with it a lot of kind of schismatic forces, the Montanists and the Donatists in particular were schismatic sects that broke with the dominant church in many key elements of doctrine. And so the Catholic Church's response to those divisive tensions was orthodoxy, basically to teach, here is the correct view of theology, and we will not tolerate any other alternative. And that orthodoxy also reflects the idea of dogma. It also reflects the idea of indoctrination, that you are being indoctrinated into Catholicism when you go through various forms of Sunday school and confirmation and things like that. And so orthopraxis is the advocacy of, again, correct practice or belief. And that is, basically the contention that the Catholic Church and Christians in general should work for social justice for the poor. And so importantly, orthopraxis is the idea that we work to end oppression. And a key part of that, again, is consciousness raising. And to kind of quote Gutierrez, we will have an authentic theology of liberation only when the oppressed themselves can freely raise their voice and express themselves directly and creatively in society and in the heart of the people of God, when they themselves account for the hope which they bear, when they are protagonists of their own liberation. And so that, again, reflects this conviction that there is more expected out of the church, that the church has an obligation to reduce oppression of fellow Christians. And so I mentioned, Pope Benedict became Pope. He was a very conservative Pope. He was absolutely not sort of an advocate for liberation theology, but neither was he as hostile towards liberation theology as some, for example, American or African conservative Catholics have suggested. So the first Latin American Pope pictured on this slide is again Pope Francis, who was originally Jorge Mario Bergoglio. He was an Italian born in Argentina. He was the longtime Cardinal of Buenos Aires, and later became again Pope Francis. He was the first Latin American Pope. He was a theologian at the time that liberation theology was emerging. As a Franciscan and as a Jesuit, Pope Francis clearly evinced a far greater concern for social justice than either of the previous popes. Pope Francis's role in the beatification of Archbishop Oscar Romero of El Salvador was an important indication of his sympathy towards liberation theology. He likewise, sent a public praise of Gutierrez, what's his name? Gustavo Gutierrez, on his birthday. And so again, he reflected the sense, first and foremost, that I think Francis understood how divided the church was on matters related to social justice. He attempted to prepare the church for a move in a more care-oriented direction. But he didn't try to rock the boat so much that he provoked any kind of serious schism within the church. Likewise, the most recent Pope, again, Pope Leo XIV, the first American Pope, again reflected strong Latin American influence. Originally, he was Robert Francis Prevost. He was formerly the bishop of Chiclayo in Peru. He took the name of Leo in homage of Leo XIII, whose Rerum Novarum represented an important change and contribution to modern Catholic social teachings and an advocacy of labor rights. Leo was a close friend and ally of Francis. And I think as expected, he has hewed fairly closely to Pope Francis's pathway, which is to say, he has evinced some sympathy, particularly on immigration rights, as it relates to where the Catholic Church's position is, but he has not attempted to rock the boat, too dramatically. He has historically been viewed as neither liberal nor conservative. In fact, he is held in high esteem in both schools of Catholic theology, which is one of the reasons why he became Pope. And he has generally tended to uphold traditional Catholic views on abortion, on euthanasia, on same-sex marriage, and on the death penalty. And so following Francis's determination to include the care of the poor as intrinsic to the Catholic Church's mission is obviously something that Francis prioritizes, and again, that reflects this sense in which, in which Leo is again expressing this ethic of care. And so the argument could be made that these past two popes are more, attempting to reorient, more Jesus and somewhat less Marx. But they still want to lift up the poor. Black liberation theology, liberation theology and the role of the church in religion. Again, it's important to keep in mind, why do we have so much pressure on our southern border? Why are so many people moving north? A lot of it has to do with the Cold War. A lot of it has to do with the Reagan doctrine and with the destabilization of several regimes there in the 1980s, where that destabilization has persisted to the present. Okay? And that has open space. Again, another problem that is kind of U.S. oriented is our seemingly inexhaustible demand for illicit drugs, and that has given openings to drug gangs to purchase narcotics and to get them sent north. There is a long-standing gray area within the United States regarding migrant farm workers and the relationship with U.S. agribusiness. The Trump administration's determination to effect mass deportations also has strong, kind of resonance within the liberation theology movement, and that is. Again, this is something that, the recent Pope Leo XIV has similarly expressed concern. And I would imagine he would be denouncing the Trump administration's decision to blow up boats and kill people within the Caribbean, simply on the allegation that they are narco-terrorists. Black liberation has typically less emphasis on Western Marxism than Catholic liberation theology. And in fact, that kind of reflects the reality that you've got a group of people that are operating within the United States, whereas liberation theology is primarily taking place in Latin America and to some extent in Central America. But for to a significant extent, the challenge is that these folks the liberation theologists are freer to draw on more critical aspects of political ideas and ideology than are American liberation theologists. And so there's less emphasis on critical Western Marxism and more on, more on straight up liberationist aspects of the scripture. There again, you'll see, sort of the emphasis on the book of Exodus. You've got Luke 14, 18. Preach the gospel to the poor, heal the brokenhearted, set the captives free, offer sight to the blind, and liberate those who are oppressed. We could note, again on this slide is James H. Cone, who was a black liberation theologian. He was instrumental in the mentorship of Raphael Warnock, who became himself a Southern Baptist minister, and today he is now a U.S. Senator, having successfully challenged, I can't remember what the name of the Republican was. So when you look at the liberation theology view, again, the agent is a narrower set of people. It's not just humanity, it's Christians. What is the obstacle? Sin, oppression, or indifference to suffering. The goal, equal dignity, equal respect, and above all, social justice. So I could continue and talk a little bit about animal liberation and the politics of speciesism. I think I'm going to close it on this note because, again, that's reflective. I think it's a perfectly legitimate ideological viewpoint. I simply, for time's sake, I'm going to choose not to expose you to animal liberation. I would note that Peter Singer is an Australian philosopher who has been extraordinarily influential in the animal liberation movement. So let's move on and talk a little bit about the liberation ideologies and their common features. First and foremost, as far as how they go about explaining the world. These are narrow-casted descriptions of the challenges confronting specific groups of people. These challenges are explained in the form of specific beliefs, be it racism, sexism, homophobia, speciesism if you're an animal rights advocate. And again, these are criticisms of mainstream society and their attitudes. I don't think as individuals we need to necessarily feel any sense of guilt. We should acknowledge these are arguments. And that they, in some instances, they have stronger points than in others. In terms of evaluation, oppression is the key to determining the well-being of a specific group. The more oppressive the conditions, the worse off the group. The more people are lifted out of oppressive circumstances, the less oppressed they are. This is kind of like Marxism in that sense, in that Marx views everything through the lens of equality, right, or the condition of the proletariat. In terms of orientation, people are again oriented by their awareness of their oppression as members of specific groups, recognition of their common experiences as blacks, women, members of the LGBTQ plus community, or as Christians. That's what's most important. And finally, for program, there are these tactical variations between moderate or liberal or reformers and more radical revolutionary folks that really want to shake things up right now. But the common goal, obviously, is to liberate groups of people from their oppressive circumstances. How do liberation ideologies view with democracy? All liberation ideologies tend to focus on the ideal of autonomy and self-rule and of group self-rule. Now, again, the problem there, and this is something that we could discuss in greater detail, is the idea that oftentimes when you give group rights to people, the group rights include ways that people are subject to discrimination. And that's one of the kind of tension points between a more communitarian legal perspective like you would see with indigenous peoples and with liberalism. But that again is a challenge. Most ideologies tend to aspire to equal citizenship, They employ strategies to pursue those goals, like consciousness raising and overcoming these internalized, man-made shackles that tend to demean people and hold them in their place. Many of the current clashes over multiculturalism are again reflected in these struggles of liberation ideologies. And the politics of difference demands tolerance for ways of living beyond the imposed norms of a dominant culture. Now, there are a lot of people out there. There's a famous scholar by the name of Francis Fukuyama, who I believe I've mentioned elsewhere, who has argued that identity politics is problematical because it automatically produces these kinds of backlashes. And the challenge, of course, is that yes, there are backlashes, but people are calling out for the respect of their identities for a reason, because they have been subjected to discrimination. Would we be a better place if we didn't have that discriminatory past? Would we be in a better place if everyone was as tolerant as need be of practices that differ from norms that are not somehow harmful to others? And what constitutes harm to others? Again, that is a challenge with which, again, liberals and conservatives and socialists and all these other groups are going to tend to disagree. So that's it for this discussion, and that's it for the politics of identity. I hope you have survived the process of being exposed to these identity-based ideologies. Again, I think they're simply ideas. I think we have to, acknowledge them, engage with them critically, think about them where they have a point, and criticize them where you think that their views are misguided. That's what we do. The remedy for problematic speech is more speech. It's not throwing people in jail or getting people fired from jobs where they're trying in a good faith way to do what their job teaches them to do. So when we come back, we're going to deal with another kind of distinctive set of ideological positions, and that is green politics, the politics of environmentalism and of ecological preservation. I'll see you next time.